The little girl hadn't spoken in 137 days. Not a single word, not when the neighbors brought cookies. Not when her teacher knelt beside her and whispered, "It's okay to be sad." Not even when her father cried into the kitchen sink at night, thinking she couldn't hear. Her name was Maya, and she was 5 years old. Her hair was thick and dark, pulled back in uneven ponytails. Her eyes wide, deep, and far too old for her age seemed always fixed on something just behind the moment, something lost. Everyone had an explanation. Children grieve differently. She just needs time, maybe therapy. But none of them had truly seen her. Not until Shadow arrived. He was brought in as a last resort. A retired German shepherd from a failed police canine program. Too anxious, too reactive, too human to follow orders like a robot. They said he was unpredictable. But when Maya met Shadow for the first time, she looked up. He didn't bark. Didn't move. Just stood there, watching. Then, slowly, he stepped forward one paw at a time and lay down beside her, his body curved around her tiny frame like armor. Maya didn't smile, didn't cry, but she reached out her hand and rested it on his head. It was the first time she'd touched anyone in months. And though no one said it out loud, everyone in the room felt it. This wasn't just a girl and a dog. This was the beginning of something that just might save them both. Maya's mother left one morning, without a sound. No sirens, no shouting, just stillness. And a woman slumped over at the kitchen table, eyes still open. Cardiac arrest, they said, sudden, unexpected. But Maya didn't understand any of that. All she knew was that the night before, her mother had tucked her into bed with a story. Once, there was a dog who loved a little girl more than anything in the world. The next morning, that story was never finished. Maya was 5, and something inside her collapsed. Her father, Sem, used to be a stage designer brilliant with wood, light, and illusion. Now, he barely spoke. He would sit at the kitchen table, staring into his coffee, then leave for work without taking a sip. He, too, had collapsed. But not like Maya. Maya had folded inward. It took 3 months for her to return to school. Even then, she didn't speak. At recess, she would sit in the far corner of the yard, watching the other children laugh and play like they were characters on a screen. She didn't trust joy, maybe because she believed it could disappear, just like her mother. At home, she refused everything: toys, food, affection. Sometimes she curled up on the couch with her mother's old blanket and just sat, still, silent, staring into nothing. But she didn't cry, because Maya wasn't just sad. She was vacant, words had abandoned her. And she had let them go. Then one day, a woman from Child Services came by. "Have you considered animal-assisted therapy?" she asked. Some hesitated. A dog, in the house. What if it scared Maya? But there weren't many options left. And so, Shadow arrived, a black and gray German shepherd. No harness, no commands, eyes like flint, quiet, observant. They said he was too unpredictable for police work. He didn't bark, didn't fetch, didn't obey strangers. Some wanted him sent back to the shelter, but one trainer had said, "This dog knows what broken people look like." That dot in Maya was broken. The first few days were quiet. Shadow didn't try to impress Maya. He didn't wag his tail, didn't lick her face, didn't nuzzle her for attention. He simply existed, always nearby, never too close. Present, watchful, Maya didn't speak. But she noticed him. She watched him from behind her blanket on the couch, her eyes peeking out like a forest animal unsure whether to step forward or run. Shadow would lie down exactly 4 feet away. Every time, when she moved, he adjusted. When she sat, he settled. When she cried, not loudly, just those dry, breathless sobs, he would lower his head onto his paws and wait. David, her father, noticed the shift, not dramatic, but subtle. One morning, Maya walked into the kitchen, and instead of crawling under the table like she usually did, she sat in a chair. Shadow sat beside her. David poured her milk. She didn't drink it, but she stayed. That afternoon, Maya was in the yard. just sitting in the grass, knees pulled to her chest. Shadow walked over, dropped his body beside her, and stared at the same empty spot in the distance. No words, no leash, just two souls sharing space. By the end of the week, Maya started drawing again. Simple shapes at first, circles, trees, then a small figure with pointed ears and a long nose. Shadow, always Shadow. One day, David found her asleep on the living room rug. Shadow was curled around her like a shield. Her fingers were tangled in the fur at his neck. She didn't wake when David lifted her into his arms. But Shadow did. His eyes followed them all the way to her room. He didn't move until David whispered, "She's safe." Then, for the first time since he'd arrived, Shadow exhaled and slept. It happened on a Sunday morning. The sky was soft with mist, the kind that made the world feel quieter than usual. David had gone to the grocery store, just for milk and bread. Maya was left in the care of Mrs. Aldridge, their elderly neighbor, who liked to knit and talk to her plants. Maya sat in the backyard with Shadow, her small hands buried in his thick fur. It had become their ritual, no words, just air and presence. But this morning, something was different. A sudden crash echoed down the street. Then a scream, then nothing. Shadow's head snapped up. His ears went rigid, his body stiffened. Maya looked up too, wide-eyed. Down the block, a stray dog large, matted, wild had broken through Mrs. Aldridge's fence. It lunged at her little terrier with snapping teeth and foaming jaws. Mrs. Aldridge screamed again, falling onto the concrete as she tried to pull her dog away. Maya froze, but Shadow didn't. He bolted, no command, no hesitation. He leapt the garden fence like it was made of feathers. David's car turned the corner just in time to see it happen. By the time he ran toward the chaos, it was over. Shadow stood, unmoving, between the wild dog and Mrs. Aldridge. His shoulder was bleeding 3 deep gashes from where he'd been bitten, but his gaze never broke. The other dog backed away, defeated, afraid. David knelt beside Shadow, pressing a cloth to the wound. "Maya, where's Maya?" He turned back toward the yard, expecting tears, panic, a meltdown. Instead, he saw her at the fence. Tiny hands gripping the wood, eyes locked on Shadow. Then, her lips parted, and the softest sound came out. "Is he okay?" David froze. Mrs. Aldridge gasped. It was the first word Maya had spoken in over 4 months. She climbed through the gate on trembling legs, approached Shadow slowly, and placed her hand on his bleeding shoulder. "He saved her," she whispered. Then she looked up at David. "Can we help him now?" Something broke open in that moment, not just in Maya, but in everyone. Because this wasn't just a protective instinct. This was connection. Shadow had fought for someone else. And in doing so, he'd given Maya a reason to care again. From the moment she spoke, something shifted. Maya didn't suddenly return to who she used to be. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't playing with dolls. But now she watched Shadow. She followed him from room to room, always a few steps behind. She waited outside the bathroom door when he went in with David. She began setting down his water bowl herself. No words, but intention. When Shadow's stitches were done, the vet gave instructions for his rest and recovery. "He'll need quiet, routine, and time." David laughed softly. "That's all we have." Maya insisted on sleeping near him. They made a little bed beside hers, and each night she'd whisper to him in the dark. Not full sentences, just pieces. "Are you sore?" "Don't be scared." "I'm not scared, not much." David listened through the baby monitor. Each word a miracle, and Shadow listened, too. He didn't move when she spoke. He just breathed deeply, calmly, letting her voice fill the spaces that had been silent for so long. One afternoon, David found a notebook on the floor. Maya had drawn Shadow lying beside a little girl, both of them surrounded by hearts and stars. And beneath it, in crooked, determined letters, "He didn't run away." That was when David realized. This wasn't just about the dog. Maya hadn't stopped speaking because she was scared. She'd stopped because she didn't believe anything or anyone would stay, but Shadow had stayed. When it hurt, when it bled, when it was hard. And now Maya was choosing him. One evening, during dinner, Maya lifted a piece of chicken from her plate, leaned over, and fed it to Shadow without a word. Then she looked at David and whispered, "He likes the ones with crispy skin." David nearly dropped his fork. Later that night, he called the therapist they'd stopped seeing months ago. "She's talking," he said, voice shaking. "Not much, but she's coming back." The therapist paused. "What changed?" David looked at Shadow, asleep at Maya's feet. She finally trusted something not to leave. Shadow had never been trained to be a therapist. He had no formal qualifications, no medals, no commands he consistently obeyed. But what he did have was presence. And that was something Maya needed more than anything else. Her therapist, Dr. Elena Rhodes, returned cautiously. She'd seen too many false starts with grief, too many moments that flickered out before they could catch. But the moment she stepped into the house, she felt it. The weight had shifted. Shadow didn't bark. He didn't hide. He stood between Maya and the visitor, his body tall, but not aggressive. Maya placed her hand on his back. "She's safe," David whispered. "With him, she's different." Dr. Rhodes sat down on the carpet beside Maya. "No need to talk today," she said softly. "We can just sit." Maya looked down at Shadow, then slowly nodded. That was the first time Maya sat in a room with a stranger and didn't flinch. In the weeks that followed, Shadow became the bridge. He'd lie between Maya and the world, absorbing tension like a sponge. During sessions, Maya would pet his ears while speaking in fragments. "She doesn't come back." I waited. Everything got too loud, and when words failed, Shadow was still there. Maya learned to regulate her breathing by matching it to his. She learned courage by watching how calmly he faced new sounds, new people, new places. She learned how to trust because Shadow never rushed her, never left. One day, Dr. Rhodes asked, "What do you think Shadow is teaching you?" Maya was quiet. Then, almost too softly to hear, she said, "That I don't have to be afraid, all the time." David wiped a tear from his cheek. Even Shadow shifted closer, resting his head in Maya's lap like a teacher giving silent approval. That night, Maya slept without the blanket that had once belonged to her mother. She didn't need it anymore. She had something warm, breathing, real. And in the quiet between two heartbeats, she whispered, "Thank you for staying." It was a field trip, just a short visit to the local museum, paintings, fossils, quiet hallways. Maya had been making steady progress, speaking more, drawing often, even laughing softly when Shadow followed her around the garden like a furry shadow of her soul. But crowds were still hard, noise still sent her inward. And David was terrified this trip might undo all they'd built. Still, he let her go with Shadow by her side, wearing his emotional support vest and the small name tag that read, "Please ask before petting." For a while, everything went fine. The children walked in pairs. The teacher pointed to dinosaur bones. Maya held her sketchbook tight and Shadow's leash tighter. His body pressed to her leg, grounding, calming. But then a balloon popped, loud, sharp, sudden. Maya flinched. A boy screamed. Someone bumped her shoulder. Her sketchbook fell to the floor, pages scattering like birds. The world tilted. She dropped the leash and ran. She pushed through the glass doors, out into the garden path, her breath shallow, her chest tight, her vision blurring. Not again, not again, not again. She collapsed behind a hedge, arms over her head, heart pounding like a drum inside a cave. Then, soft paws, warm fur. A low, steady breath. Shadow. He had followed her. Found her, sat beside her. Didn't bark, didn't push. He just waited. Maya opened her eyes, her fists slowly unclenched. "I didn't mean to leave you," she whispered. "I just got scared." Shadow leaned in, resting his head in her lap, and that's when she heard it. Footsteps, the teacher, the other kids, David. They had come, this time, and no one disappeared. David knelt beside her, his voice shaking. "You're okay, we're here." Maya looked at him, her cheeks streaked with silent tears. "I thought you'd be mad." He shook his head. "No, honey, I'm proud. You asked for help, and for the first time, in a long time." Maya reached out, not to the dog, to her father. She climbed into his arms, held tight, and Shadow followed behind them, tail wagging softly, mission complete. In that moment, Maya didn't just come back to her family, she came back to herself. After the museum, things changed not suddenly, but meaningfully. Maya didn't just talk, she began to speak. Her sentences grew longer, her eyes held steady contact. She started humming while she drew. Sometimes she'd even giggle when Shadow sneezed or when his tail knocked over a flower pot. She still had quiet days, days where she needed space. But now, she let people in bit by bit. Shadow remained by her side like a heartbeat. He walked with her to school, waited outside therapy sessions, laid beside her as she read out loud in a slow, careful voice. David watched in awe as his daughter slowly rewrote her story, not forgetting the pain, but choosing to grow beyond it. One afternoon, Maya asked if they could visit her mother's grave. David hesitated. They hadn't gone since the funeral, but he nodded. They brought flowers. Maya carried a drawing in her hand. It was a picture of herself, and her mom, and Shadow. 3 figures beneath a giant tree. Maya placed it on the grass, tucked under a stone. "I thought if I talked to her, it would hurt too much," she whispered. David squeezed her shoulder. "Does it hurt now?" "Yes," she said. Then added, "But it's okay." Shadow rested his chin on her shoe, still as stone. That night, Maya did something she hadn't done since before her mother passed. She sang, just a few soft notes, a lullaby. One her mother used to hum. David stood in the hallway and listened, hand to his mouth. He didn't cry. He let the song wash over him like sunlight. And when it ended, he whispered into the quiet, "Thank you, Shadow. You brought her back." Shadow stirred at the sound of his name, then settled again, content. Because that's what healing sounds like. It's not loud. It's not fast. It's the soft return of laughter to a house that had forgotten it. The seasons changed. Leaves turned gold, then crisp. The wind shifted from summer breath to autumn hush. And Maya bloomed. She started helping in the kitchen. First with washing vegetables, then stirring pancake batter. She made friends at school, real ones. She joined art club and drew pictures with bold lines and bright skies. Her teachers sent notes home. Maya participated in circle time today. She shared her drawing and told the class about her dog. She laughed. David hung each note on the fridge like medals. Every night, before bed, Maya brushed Shadow's coat. She spoke softly to him, retelling her day in the kind of detail only children remember. "The new girl has purple shoes. We planted bean sprouts." I didn't cry today, not even once. Shadow listened with the patience of a monk. He didn't interrupt. He never needed to. David began volunteering at the local shelter on weekends. He'd bring Maya along. She helped walk the small dogs, holding their leashes with quiet pride. "She's a natural," the staff said. David would smile. She learned from the best. They printed a photo of Maya and Shadow for the shelter's wall. Beneath it was a quote she had said without realizing its weight. "He didn't fix me. He just waited until I was ready." And that was everything. One Saturday, Maya stood in front of her bookshelf, holding a book she used to love, but had refused to touch since the funeral. David saw her hesitate. "You want me to read it?" He asked gently. Maya shook her head. "I want to read it to him." She sat cross-legged on the carpet, Shadow lying beside her, tail flicking once as she opened the first page. Her voice wobbled at first, but it steadied and grew and filled the room. David stepped back, heart full, watching his daughter read to the dog who had carried her out of silence. And for the first time in a long time, he believed they were going to be okay. Maya was no longer the girl who didn't speak. She was still quiet, still thoughtful. But now her silence had meaning, not fear. She chose when to speak, when to laugh, when to cry. She had learned that feelings didn't need to be buried. They could live, she could live, and at the center of it all was Shadow. Not just a dog, not just a support animal, but the one who waited in the dark until she was ready to come back into the light. Shadow, too, had changed. His body moved slower now. A slight limp lingered from the bite that had left a scar on his side. But he held his head high. His ears were always listening for Maya's footsteps. His tail still wagged at her voice. He had become something more than anyone expected. Not a therapy tool, not a patient, but a guardian, the kind you only meet once in a lifetime. At school, Maya was asked to bring in something for show and tell. Most kids brought toys, drawings, favorite books. Maya stood in front of the class holding a photo. It was her and Shadow, sitting under a tree in the garden. Her hand resting on his neck, his eyes calm. At the bottom of the photo, she had written, "This is the friend who waited for me." Her voice didn't shake when she spoke. He didn't bark or chase or play fetch like other dogs. But when I couldn't talk, he listened. When I didn't want hugs, he laid next to me. He didn't fix me. He stayed. And because he stayed, I came back. The room was silent. Then, one by one, the children clapped, and Maya smiled. Not a small, shy smile, a real one. The kind her mother used to say could light up the whole sky. Later that night, David tucked her into bed. "Do you miss her?" Maya asked softly. "Every day," he said. She nodded. "I think she sent Shadow." David paused. Then whispered, "I think, maybe she did." In the doorway, Shadow stood watch like always. Eyes steady, body still, a protector, a friend. The silent guide who had walked a little girl home from the edge of grief. Not all rescues are loud. Some happen quietly. In a garden, in a bedroom. In the space between a child's silence and a dog's stillness. Maya's story isn't just about grief, it's about returning. Returning to trust, to joy, to words. And Shadow, he wasn't just a dog. He was the hand that didn't reach to pull her forward. He simply stayed behind until she was ready. Because sometimes, healing isn't about someone fixing you. It's about someone refusing to leave. It's about showing up again and again. Until the silence becomes safe and the world becomes possible again. This story is for anyone who's ever felt lost. For anyone who's ever needed just one reason to come back. And for anyone lucky enough to have had a shadow in their life. The quiet companion who waits and waits and never stops believing in you. Because love, the real kind, doesn't always speak. It just stays. If this story moved you, if you've ever been saved by loyalty, by love that simply stayed, then help us share it. Like the video, share it with someone who needs hope. Subscribe for more true, emotional stories. And in the comments ... Tell us about your shadow, the one who waited, the one who helped you find your way back. Because sometimes, all it takes is one story. To remind someone they're not alone. Thank you for watching. And remember, the quietest love is often the strongest.